So I left the USA on Thursday and came back to Lockdown Britain, which is all pretty depressing. Although I suppose the fact that I've got a quarantine, because there's nowhere to go, makes it not perhaps quite as bad as it could be. I'll come back to those US elections, what the impact's going to be for the United Kingdom, for the USA, and in particular for Brexit. But just a few thoughts on lockdown. We were presented with some figures by the government's chief scientists, and that's one of the reasons the Prime Minister gave for putting us back into a full 1 month lockdown. It now turns out those figures simply weren't true. They were at least 50% overestimates on the worst case scenario. Now, this is not quite the Iraq War dodgy dossier yet, but you do have to ask yourself some questions. We're being told that this lockdown is being done to protect the NHS, exactly the same reason that was given to us back in March. Now, we know during the first lockdown, we finished up with tens of thousands of empty hospital beds. And when we get to December the 2nd, at the end of this second lockdown, and I've no doubt they'll take us out of it for Christmas. But if that's the logic that applies, what's to stop us going back into a third lockdown in January, a fourth lockdown in March? If you follow the logic of the government's position, this could be an endless series of lockdowns, because for all the optimistic talk about a vaccine, I think the reality is that it's some way away. And what about the impacts of all of this? Well, the one thing I can tell you is that opposition to this is building across the country, and it's no wonder. My email box is absolutely chock full. I've got to tell you, much of it makes very depressing reading indeed. I've got letters from small businesses, letters from sole traders, letters from shopkeepers, and they all say the same thing. They don't think they can survive this second lockdown. So we're headed towards mass business bankruptcies. We're headed towards massive unemployment. It'll be even higher, far higher, in fact, than it was back in the early 1980s. And yet at the same time, who are the beneficiaries? Well, close down the shops. You want to buy something? Where do you go? Amazon. So the richest man in the world gets richer, and the millions of you out there who've taken a chance to go on your own, to do your own thing, are being crushed. Let alone what the costs of a furlough scheme going on now until next spring, a national debt that is over £2 trillion. So the economics of this are pretty catastrophic, certainly for ordinary men and women. On the health side of it, well, we know that 99.5% of people who get this horrible virus do recover from it. And yes, some people are dying, and that is awful. But just think about the average age of those that are dying. It's over 82 years old. Now, I'm not being callous about this in any way at all, but that is higher than life expectancy. And for the huge population of this country under the age of 50, this disease is far less of a risk than dying of a road accident, dying of many other forms of mortality. And we know that lung cancer diagnoses are down 75%. We know heart diagnoses are massively down. We know that all over the country, type 1 diabetics have not been screened at all since March. When you add up the total health cost of stopping surgery, stopping diagnosis, clearing out the National Health Service in case a huge wave of infections come, you see that the cure is indeed worse than the disease itself. And spare a thought in all of this. And you know, we've talked about care homes and the dreadful things that happened and should never have happened. We talk a lot about grandparents, great-grandparents not able to see their families. And I think that situation is pretty bleak for a lot of people living on their own or living in care homes. But just spare a thought for the younger generation. You know, a younger generation. I mean, take the ones, for example, that went to university in September. First year at uni, there they are. They're being charged, of course, fees of £9,000 a year with 6% interest charges. They're staying in halls of residence. They're having to pay for that. It's means tested, but they're having to pay for that. And what's happened? Well, the lessons have stopped. They're told they can't leave the halls of residence, can't socialise with the people next door. There are COVID marshals coming around, making sure they're in their room on their own, not playing music too loudly. I mean, we've virtually imprisoned these people at university. So I'm not even the least bit surprised that in Manchester at the weekend, a group of students just tore down the fences that had been put around the halls of residence. I never, ever encourage direct action. I never encourage violence. I never encourage law breaking of any kind. But I can imagine if I was 19 years old, I'd gone to uni, I'd been there 2 months, and I was effectively stuck in something like a prison. I can imagine I'd be pretty upset. I think the least we can do is say to our ripped off, conned students that they're going to get a 30% reduction in their fees. And that's really quite a modest, I think, quite a modest offering, given the level of suffering that they're being put through. And I feel very, very sorry for that younger generation. The other thing that is extraordinary to me is that we went into second lockdown with the government admitting that they hadn't looked at any impact assessments on other areas. So we are going on the word of a couple of scientists and a committee called SAGE, who are looking in isolation at the worst case scenario for the COVID-19 virus. But they haven't measured any of the other sciences. They haven't measured, have they? They haven't measured what the impact on mental health is. Well, amongst my bag of letters, I've had a couple of quite upsetting emails from people saying that family members of theirs have committed suicide, and they are not the easiest of letters to answer. But general levels of mental health, abuse, be it domestic or substance. I mean, these are all things that are going on in our country, and not that I've been out, but I'm told that no one seems to smile anymore. So no economic impact assessments, no health assessments on what the effect on cancer, heart, diabetes and the rest would be, no mental health assessments. And I do wonder what on earth we think we're doing. Now, the last time I spoke to you, I was in the USA and I was following the Trump train around America. On the day that I arrived, we were told by the Washington Post that he was 17 points behind and absolutely doomed. Well, it didn't quite work out like that. It looks like in the 4 or 5 key states that Biden is going to win them on average by about 1%. It is a very, very small number. What is also true, in the House of Representatives, the Republicans have increased their numbers of seats. The Senate, they are almost certain to hang on to. So you're going to see Biden very much as a lame duck president. Not, of course, that you'd know that from the coverage. Oh, I remember 4 years ago, Sky and the BBC, Trump has won, scenes of people in Times Square crying, commentators on our television saying that something terrible had befallen America and the world. Well, what we got from Sky News, I saw Kay Burley saying, I know that Joe Biden wants to make America great again. And from the interviews and the scenes they were showing around America, I really thought Jesus Christ may well have come back for a second time. But hey, we expect this kind of thing. Now, is Trump right to be complaining? Is he right to say that it's a stolen election? Well, what I do know is that wherever postal voting is used, we not only get weak verification, we not only get postal vote fraud, we also get the most extraordinary level of intimidation. It's quite easy, isn't it? There's an elderly woman living on her own. The postman delivers the postal vote, and 20 minutes later, some nice big man knocks on the door and says, I've come to collect your vote. Oh, I can help you fill it in. This is the sort of thing that goes on. We've seen it in this country over and over and over. I was involved on behalf of the Brexit Party in a court case last year after the Peterborough by-election, and we lost the case. I was stunned that we did. But the difficulty with all of this is so much of it is circumstantial. You can know that what has been done is wrong, but to absolutely be able to prove it is difficult, because when we spoke to people in Peterborough, they told us what had happened. They told us how their votes had effectively been collected from them, blank sheets in most cases. But when we went back to get full statements, nobody would answer the door because they were too scared to do so. Have there been some appalling practices in America? Well, yeah, ballot dumps. The idea that after the polls have closed, large sacks of votes arrive. Clearly, that must be wrong. Dead people getting the vote, clearly that must be wrong. A computer system called Dominion that's been used in 30 states, where already in one of the counties of Michigan, it turns out that 3,000 votes for Donald Trump somehow accidentally went into the Joe Biden column. I don't know whether there is enough evidence for any of this to stand up in court. And of course, the world is trying to portray Donald Trump as being a bad loser. Well, they're the same people who spent the first 3 years of his presidency saying that he didn't really win the election in 2016. It was the Russians what done it, Mueller inquiries and so on and so forth. I think Trump is right to ask the question. I think Trump is right to go to court. If he loses in court, then he will simply have to accept the result. But I think for him to have got 70 million votes, for, as I say, the Republicans to have increased in the House of Representatives to hold on to the Senate, he has not done badly. My guess is he's not going anywhere. So what of Joe Biden? Lovely, nice Joe Biden, who gave a speech. Actually, to be fair, it was quite a good speech about how America must come together. Well, lieutenants around him, including Michelle Obama, have been saying some pretty incendiary things about their loathing of Trump and the right as they see it. So I'm not so sure we're going to get much healing from the Democrats. But let me tell you what I do know. This is going to make a massive difference to Brexit. Why? Well, number one, Obama was the man, of course, who came here and said to us that if we dared to vote to become an independent country like America, we would go to the back of the queue. Remember that insult back in 2016? Well, who was his vice president? Well, of course, it was Joe Biden. And Biden thinks Brexit's a mistake. Biden thinks the European Union is a great thing. But even more importantly, Biden is an Irish nationalist. Not content with just campaigning for Gerry Adams to go to America back in the early 90s. He was even photographed with Gerry Adams in 2017. And the third person in the picture was an IRA fugitive, a woman who was arrested and imprisoned for attempting to murder a British Army officer in the 1970s, and she escaped, and she's been on the run ever since. People with good political judgment would do their utmost not to be photographed with IRA terrorists, but it doesn't matter to Joe. And when the BBC asked him a question, Mr. Biden, do you have a word for the BBC? He said, I'm Irish. Well, he might as well have simply stuck two fingers up. He's already said, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has already said that there won't be a trade deal with the United Kingdom if the Good Friday Agreement is threatened, if there is the possibility of a return to a hard border. It is the Michel Barnier line. It is the Dublin line. And be in no doubt that when he comes to Europe, he will not be flying to London. It will not be the relationship that Donald Trump sought with the United Kingdom. He'll go to Berlin because, of course, he sees Germany as being the big power in this new European Union. So we're in trouble on that score. But what is even worse, the former American ambassador to the European Union spoke in Berlin last week. And he said Britain's relationship with America will be determined by the deal the UK does with the European Union. So Monsieur Barnier is in London today, and he is in a very much stronger position than he was this time last week. 4 years ago, I was in Trump Tower shortly after the US presidential election, and I was told by that team, we want to do a deal with the United Kingdom as quickly as we can. It's the right thing for both of us, and it proves that far from being an isolationist, Trump wants to do trade deals with the right people. And under the Tories, we've had 4 years of dither. 4 years on, and we still haven't got Brexit completed. And now we find that unless we jump as high as Monsieur Barnier wants us, we won't be having good relations or a trade deal with the most powerful country in the world. There won't be a deal with Brussels. Now, look, you may well say, I may well say, better to walk away than to be bullied like this, but I don't think Boris Johnson has it within him. I think what we've done through indecision and dither is effectively played ourselves into checkmate. We're locked in the middle of the Atlantic, and we're not going to have a friend on either side of it unless Boris gives in on the level playing field, gives in on fisheries, and gives in on a whole host of other areas. I have to say that right now, I am more pessimistic as a result of those US elections. I'm more pessimistic about the final shape of Brexit than I've been at any point in the course of the last year. You know, Boris stormed to power, telling us that Brexit was going to be done, that we were going to be free. It doesn't look like that. And that's why, whether it's on COVID and lockdown, on dodgy figures, Brexit, the complete failure of our government and quangos during this crisis, that's why we need a voice of opposition, because there isn't one. There just isn't one. You know, the Labour Party, but the whole of Parliament, over 500 of them voted for lockdown, and very, very few of them in Parliament have got the courage to say, well, if that's how Biden's going to behave, if that's how Barnier's going to behave, we'll go it on our own and make the best of it. So I'm afraid we are not in a great shape. Genuine political opposition is needed, and I'm going to try and give voice to that as much as I possibly can. Thank you.